Right. Can you see that slide? Herbicide selectivity.
Yes, we can.
Good. So, what is herbicide selectivity? It's the ability of the herbicide to kill some plants, generally weeds, leaving other plants, crops unharmed. In other words, if we use the herbicide to control weeds, why should weeds die and the crop escape herbicide damage? That is what we wanted to talk about. Now, whenever we put the herbicide on a plant, the plant will respond depending on the species. Now, sometimes the plant can be killed if it is susceptible, especially the weed. We call this a positive response. It may tolerate the herbicide or it may be tolerant. This is the negative response, no plant damage. We expect this from a crop, but increasing herbicide dosage sometimes there is a loss of tolerance. Then there's this response which we call resistance. This is negative response, no plant damage at any herbicide dose. This sometimes is not desirable because some weeds may end up not being killed. You could have heard about what is known as Roundup Ready maize and soybean GMOs. These are crops which are deliberately bred so that they are not killed by Roundup, the herbicide glyphosate, which kills everything. Sometimes this simplifies weed control because we know Roundup can kill everything. And if we can design crops or if we breed the crops, okay. Yeah, can you see the slide? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. So, Roundup Ready maize, and the soybeans, GMOs uh, are not killed by the herbicides. We also have a situation where we have imazapa resistant maize or IR maize, where we can control striga using imazapa, which can potentially kill maize. This is actually not a GMO. Okay, my slide is a bit stuck. Right. So this is Roundup Ready soybean, where Roundup can be sprayed to soybean and it cannot be killed. We can also have the same technology to maize, where we have Roundup ready maize, where maize can be spared by this Roundup. Remember, on these crops, breeding has been done in such a way that these crops should not be killed by the herbicide in order to simplify weed control. But of course, we don't have this kind of technology in Zimbabwe, but in USA and possibly in South Africa near home, they can use this technology. Here we have got a slide showing MCPA, which was applied to weeds, soybean, and maize. You can see that MCPA selectively killed soybean and weeds, leaving maize. So the herbicide can come into contact with the plant via the nozzle, and it can go through the leaf, or it can be sprayed to the soil, then it can enter the plant. Now, on herbicide effects, herbicides enter the plants via leaves and roots. Actually, sometimes what gives the selectivity is the speed at which these herbicides are traveling within the plants. If it is a slow movement, then there could be selectivity. If it is fast, then the herbicide could kill the plant. Herbicides penetrate the plant barriers. The first plant barrier is the cuticle, which is outside the leaves. The herbicides then move via the phloem, xylem vessels, in order to reach the site of action. So how is herbicide selectivity achieved? As I indicated earlier, there can be non-physiological processes and physiological processes. So we're going to consider number one, which is non-physiological processes. So non-physiological processes which are important in herbicide selectivity. Number one, there's what we call plant spray interception characteristics. We want to find out what can happen. Let's say we are putting post-emergence herbicides, applying herbicides when the plants have already emerged. Now, the droplets containing the herbicides may not stay on the plants. They will simply roll off depending on the surface of the leaf. Imagine this is the droplets, which is circle shaped, and this is the surface area. Once the droplet is circle shaped, the point of contact is very small, so it displays a very small surface area, and it can easily roll off the plant and fall. But sometimes we put what are known as surfactants within the herbicide to flatten this contact so that the droplet may actually stay on the leaf surface. In that case, the herbicide may enter into the plant. So I'm going to use these principles to explain what can happen when the spray droplets reaches the plants, which can either be the crop or the weed. Now let us look at the two weeds, Coniza arbida on the left and Datura stramonia on the right, with these broad leaves. What normally happens if we spray these two types of plants? This one with the broad leaves is likely to retain a lot of herbicide droplets because of the large area being exposed. And on a conizer, you can see the leaves are almost upright. They are not as horizontal as those of Datura stramonia. In addition to the upright leaves, you also have some hairs on a conizer. So what happens is that if you spray conizer, there's a chance that the droplets will roll off this plant. It is not going to retain the herbicide. Therefore, it can escape the phytotoxicity effects of the herbicides. The presence of the hairs may also prevent the herbicide to be in contact with the leaves. So the droplets will eventually evaporate without penetrating the plant. So the plant will survive. So leaf orientation and size are very important. We have got upright leaves versus horizontal leaves. Upright leaves allow the herbicide to pass through and fall to the ground, whereas horizontal leaves retain the droplets, and therefore the herbicide may penetrate the plant, leading to its death. Examples are Datura stramonia is likely to trap more herbicides droplets than Coniza arbida. We also have Oxalis latifolia on the left and Ageratum conizoides on the right. Now, as far as Oxalis latifolia is concerned, it has got a smooth surface. So it's likely that herbicides will roll off. They are not going to be retained by this plant. Whereas Coniza has got a lot of rough hairs, rough texture. It's likely to retain some herbicides. But because of the hairs, probably there is going to be little contact with the ageratum, and the herbicide may evaporate. But on Oxalis, the herbicides may actually roll off. So smooth surface of Oxalis latifolia is likely to trap less herbicide droplets compared to the rough surfaces of Ageratum conizoides. And at the same time, the presence of leaf hairs of Ageratum conizoides could also prevent herbicide droplets to be in contact with the surfaces. So both Oxalis latifolia and Ageratum conizoides could survive the herbicide spray because the herbicide is not entering the system. Here we've got a grass, a Lucini indica on our left and Ricardia scabra on our right. So if we spray the herbicide, it's likely that the grass is not going to retain the herbicide because of the shape of the leaves, almost perpendicular. And the droplets will simply fall to the ground, whereas Ricardia scabra will trap these droplets, and there's a chance that Ricardia scabra may die. Let's say we are spraying the herbicide such as MCPA, it's likely to kill Ricardia scabra, leaving Erythrin indica, simply because of the orientation of the leaves. So Erythrin indica is likely to trap less herbicide droplets compared to Ricardia scabra. Actually, this is the basis of bacterial or bromoxynil herbicide selectivity in wheat, where broad-leaved weeds will trap more of this herbicide compared to wheat. So wheat can survive bacterial. So the first factor which I was talking about is the orientation of the leaves, their sizes. Now we're going to talk about the plant age. Are we having seedlings or mature plants? Here we've got young Erythrin indica, which is a grass on the left, and mature Erythrin indica on the right. Now, if we spray Erythrin indica at 2 stages, we will find that the young seedlings will easily die compared to the mature plant. So young weeds are more susceptible to herbicides than mature weeds. Probably this is due to the cuticle accumulation. On small weeds, there's thin cuticle. On mature weeds, there is a thick cuticle. And this could be the basis for herbicide selectivity. Then we also talk of growing points. Now, some growing points are hidden. Growing points are areas with meristems. Meristems are cells which are involved in plant growth. So in grasses, these are hidden. But in broad-leaved weeds, these are actually exposed. Now, if we are talking about wheat, we'll find that wheat has got hidden growing points, whereas other weeds have got exposed growing points. So if you spray a post-emergent herbicide, it can easily reach the growing points for the broad-leaved weeds, and they will die, leaving wheat because it has got hidden growing points. The other reason why we have a selectivity is deliberate application techniques. We can use a potentially toxic herbicide, which can cause phytotoxicity to our crops, but we can manipulate the situation using application techniques so that our crops are safe. One of the techniques is to spray the herbicide whilst it is shielded. So you put a shield around the nozzle. This could be your nozzle. And outside the nozzle, there's this shield, and these are the weeds. So your herbicide comes through the nozzle. It cannot touch the maize, but is directed to the weeds. In some cases, some farmers may try to lower the nozzles, but this can be a bit dangerous, because any slight movement, you end up, putting the herbicide on your crop. This is directed sprays. Again, here we have got a tractor applying the herbicide using these nozzles, which are directed with the shields, so that this crop is not attacked by the herbicide. You can see the orientation of the shields, which is done so that we avoid spraying these crops or these plants. So directed sprays, the crop ideally should be taller than the weed. Shields should be used to prevent herbicide contact with the crop. Examples of herbicides, it's gramoxone. We can use it in cotton, maize, and sugarcane. Whilst we are using these shields. Also, ametrine and glyphosate could be used in sugarcane whilst using the shields. The other technique of putting a potentially toxic herbicide is weed wipers. Here's an example of a weed wiper. You put in this pipe concentrated glyphosate without water. And at the end, there's a wick or a piece of cloth which will absorb the herbicide, which is brushed on the plants. So glyphosate is brushed against weeds using, this can be done in conservation agriculture or conservation farming. Another technique is formulation, how we deliver the herbicide. How is it formulated? It can be formulated like granules. The example which I have is propanil. A long time ago, we used to have atrazine granules, which could be just broadcast without using a sprayer. So the granules, if you apply them in rice, like what they do in Asia, they are not going to stay on the rice. They will fall to the ground, which is wet, and the wetness will activate the herbicide and release it, killing the weeds. And the root entry of the herbicide in rice is very small. So rice will actually escape and the weeds will be killed. The other interesting selectivity is known as positional selectivity or depth protection. Now, with this kind of selectivity, I want you to recognize that the herbicide could actually kill the crop. But this is based on the physical properties of the herbicide. And the physical property which is exploited in order to bring about selectivity is the solubility of the herbicide. Can it be dissolved in water? Now, some herbicides are not easily dissolved in water, like metribuzin. You can hardly dissolve these herbicides. So if you spray metribuzin on the soil surface, it will move down the soil profile to a very little extent. Incidentally, it will cover the area where we find weed seeds. Now, if you were planting a crop like soybean, which is planted at 6 centimeters depth or 5 centimeters depth, when the crop germinates, it will be far away from the herbicide. But when the weeds germinate, they will germinate within the herbicide zone. And the weed seedling is going to get into contact with the herbicide and they will perish. They are going to die. Whereas your crop is going to survive. When it goes through the herbicide zone, the herbicide cannot enter the cuticle of that plant. So this can be done to soybean. We can apply Sengo to soybean or metribuzin, and this kind of selectivity can take place. We can also apply the herbicide known as pendimethalin to maize, and it can produce that kind of selectivity. So soybean and maize are planted at 6 centimeter depth or 5. Most weed seeds are found within 1 to 2 centimeters depth. So if we spray the herbicide like Sengo or metribuzin, it just covers this 2 centimeter zone. This same applies to stomp when applied to maize. So they are not going to damage our crops. And please note that these herbicides should have low water solubilities if they are going to achieve what we call depth protection. But sometimes there could be loss of selectivity, especially with the metribuzin or Sengo applied to soybean. Let's say after herbicide application, this is followed by heavy rains. There's a chance that the metribuzin could be moved to the root zone of the soybean, and the soybean could get damaged. So that is one of the problems with this approach. But of course, the soybean genotype may depend, may actually influence the level of phytotoxicity. Some soybean crops are not damaged. Now, timing of herbicide applications could also bring about selectivity. For example, MCPA, we have to apply MCPA at the 3 leafy stage of wheat. any later application could cause phytotoxicity to wheat, which appears in the form of distortions of flower heads. Actually, this is frequently reported in this country because sometimes farmers, cannot put the MCPA at the 3-leaf stage. Sometimes because of farm operations, there are delays in spraying MCPA. And when they see distorted the flower heads, they get worried. But sometimes this does not reduce wheat yields. The other herbicide is Basagran. We should aim to put it at the 3-trifoliate stage. And if we miss it and we continue to put Basagran, sometimes we see soybean turning a brownish. This will be Basagran phytotoxicity. But in most cases, the soybean will always grow out of that effect. Now we know glyphosate can kill maize, but sometimes we may have problems with couch grass in maize fields. What we may have to do is to come in early before maize has emerged and spray this glyphosate, or come in at near harvesting of maize or post maize harvest, so that we avoid glyphosate killing the crop. Well, this is the summary of non-physiological basis for selectivity. Number one, we have to consider plant spray interception characteristics, leaf orientation, nature of plant surfaces, smooth versus rough, upright versus horizontal leaves, presence of hairs, then grasses versus broad-leaved weeds. Plant age is very important. Young plants are easily susceptible to herbicides. Then position of growing points. This normally applies to wheat, which has got a hidden growing point compared to these other broad-leaved wheats. Therefore, wheat can escape the damage. Now, application techniques. We can use directed sprays where we protect crops from getting the herbicide using shields, or we can use weed wipers, or we can manipulate formulation where we apply granules, but this only applies to propanil, which is used in rice. Then there's this positional selectivity or depth protection, which exploits the physical property of herbicides, which is low water solubility. And this applies to Sengo, metribuzin, or Storm pendimethalin. When we spray these herbicides, they just sit on the soil surface, and they can only move up to 2 centimeters, which is away from the crop seed, and they can damage weeds without killing the crop. Then, of course, timing of herbicide application is very important. especially with MCPA, where you have to come in at 3 leafy stage. Again, Basagran at 3 trifoliate stage. Glyphosate, you can either come in early before crop emergence or towards harvest in order to avoid uh, killing your crop. So that's it. Of course, here I've got an example of a question which is give detailed account of different mechanisms of herbicide selectivity using relevant examples. Of course, this could be a very wide question. We can only complete it when we do the second part. So this is it. Let me stop presenting.